If there is one piece of information that should be saved from the great American memory hole, pondered, marveled over, and widely discussed, it's the following statistic from the Washington Post published on November the 9th, 2016. Quote, white evangelical voters voted in high numbers for Donald Trump, 80 to 16%, according to exit poll results. That's the most they have voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 2004, when they overwhelmingly chose President George W. Bush by a margin of 78 to 21%. End quote. If you look at the recent trend, the data suggests that while the overall percentages do not vary widely, W. Bush in 2004 gained 78% of the evangelical vote, Senator John McCain got 74% in the year the Great Recession began, and 2012 saw the number stabilize again at 78% for Governor Mitt Romney, the vote for Donald Trump exceeded them all. A high watermark of evangelical preference. A statement vote, if you will. The Post goes on to quote Nate Silver, who believes the support of evangelical Christians played an outsized role in Trump's unexpected victory. If there is a single group he can thank, it is church-going evangelicals, and especially those living in the Midwest, in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa. The reason this information is relevant is obvious, or rather it should be obvious to any rational citizen who has been monitoring political trends over the past half-century. The evangelical Christian voting bloc has been the cornerstone of the Republican Party for the same length of time. The Christian right went so far as to give itself the title and now defunct political organization known as the Moral Majority in the 1980s, and waged a series of either failed or disastrous but ongoing culture wars and legislative assaults on liberty. Moreover, evangelicals are perhaps unique among the largest sought-after voting blocs in that they argue and appear to genuinely believe that their quote-unquote Christian values guide their selection of candidates, and their moral standards come from none other than God Himself. The Christian religion is founded on the model and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, an apocalyptic preacher who roamed the Roman province of Judea sometime in the early part of the 1st century. While there is a debate about the historicity of the figure, generally speaking, scholars believe that he probably was indeed a real person, and something of the core of his message was probably preserved in many writings. Evangelical Christians look to the 4 Gospels, which were eventually canonized in the Bible, for information about Jesus. And here's where it starts to get strange. Because if you spend an hour or two with the Gospel of Mark itself, the oldest of them, you are met with a figure whose most surprising characteristic is not his miracles. Lots of gods did weird, wild shit back in the day. It's that his entire philosophy of life flies directly in the face of the quote-unquote establishment. This maniac Messiah was a Jew, as religious as the day is long, but here we find him whiling away the hours with whores, tax collectors, thieves, and all kinds of illegals. He preached love for the poor, for the sick, and for the oppressed. Those who came to him with grandiose notions of a mighty political kingdom, like any other self-respecting god or demigod or white nationalist would forge, were shut down. Nowhere did Jesus speak about the accumulation of wealth or power, much less espouse the glories of capitalism to come. Instead, he chided the rich, demanded they give up their earthly possessions and instead devote themselves to a path of loving service to the poor, criminals, sinners, outcasts, foreigners, and the dispossessed. Anything less, and your camel would have a better shot squeezing into your Prius than you do seeing paradise. He told them that though they would lack the outward signs of power and prestige that come with earthly service for earthly rewards, but not to worry, because that didn't matter. Like at all. We at Swing State would not be the first on the left to point out that Christians now and then fail to meet the standards their doctrine sets for them and they, in turn, preach for others. We would also not be the first to notice the unsubtle differences between what is preached from pulpits and the policies the religious right prescribes. Invade Iraq and take their oil, because his love endures forever. But it would be a disservice to history to let it pass without comment that the same people who preach the fundamental good and necessity of their religion in politics are guilty of electing the most morally reprobate candidate in our lifetimes. When it comes to the subject of wealth, Donald Trump is a proponent of it, to say the least. Trump is literally obsessed with the state of his finances. He spent a year going around the country boasting about his money, telling audience after audience how large his fortune was, how intelligent he had to be to gain it, and downplayed or ignored the truth about it in the seedy tactics he used to enlarge what he inherited. His charity, we discovered, was a front, later shut down by the state of New York, that Trump used to filter money others had given him while pretending to be the donor. And in several documented cases, money given to his charity was used directly to benefit Trump. In one case, it was reported that several $1,000s went towards the purchase of a portrait of himself. Casting a wider net, but sticking just to his admitted sins, Donald Trump has been married 3 separate times. He has admitted on tape to propositioning women who were not his wife while still married. He has been accused by multiple witnesses of entering the dressing rooms of beauty competitions that he ran so he could inspect the wares personally, including pageants featuring minors. And he has boasted about grabbing women by their genitals and kissing them without their consent, which is in legal speak, Title 10, United States Code, Section 910, Article 120, any person who commits a sexual act upon another person when the person knows or reasonably should know that the other person is asleep, unconscious, otherwise unaware that the sexual act is occurring, is sexual assault. He admitted it on tape. More than a dozen women came forward to accuse him of doing the exact thing he bragged about doing and doing regularly. Trump claims to be a Christian. Of that there is no doubt. He once claimed that the Bible was his favorite book. The ghost-written Art of the Deal was a close second. But when asked to recite a favorite passage, one single verse that inspired him to do good or consoled him in a time of grief and pain, he failed. When trumpeting his religious convictions to another flock of sheep, he referred to the book of 2 Corinthians as 2 Corinthians. A minor mistake, but one which no church-going Christian would ever make, because the pronunciation of 2 Corinthians, like every other two-part set of books in the Bible, is always second and not two. I've lived my lifetime around Christianity, and Trump is literally the first person I've ever heard pronounce it that way. It's exactly the kind of small but revealing mistake someone posturing as a Christian would make. Even if we pretended for a moment that the power of Christ compelled Trump to an act of repentance for the previous part of his terrible, wretched, empty life, we are still no further in explaining the choice of evangelicals. For one thing, Trump once boasted, again on tape, that he had never asked God for forgiveness. Not once. Ever. This is, of course, a problem when we recall that evangelical Christian churches have propounded forever that conviction and genuine repentance were absolutely vital, completely instrumental in bringing about the born-again conversion. But Trump isn't sorry. He is near incapable of even feigning apology and completely incapable of an authentic one. Only when the ramifications are so dire, like when the Access Hollywood tape was revealed, will Trump stoop to mimicking an act of humility. But even then he will hedge, blame, and excuse himself. Not exactly the signs of someone who's been convicted by God in his spirit. So, how do we explain this? As a free-thinking American citizen, I am not personally bound to all of the moral judgments evangelicals theoretically would make. I may not have a particular issue with his 3 wives, or 5 wives for that matter, and I may have a slightly higher threshold of proof for claims made against a wealthy celebrity before I'm willing to bayonet somebody in the street over it. But that hardly explains the moral majority. What's their fucking excuse? You can't play the few bad apples card here. This shit is statistical. Evangelicals broke records voting for Trump. If stats were royalty, this lot made Trump their king. This man represents who they are. How is that even possible? Well, if you're scratching your head trying to figure out the answer, ponder this and it may dawn on you. According to the Public Religion Research Institute, in 2011 only 30% of white evangelicals thought someone who is immoral in his personal life could be expected to behave morally in his public life. In October of 2016, researchers found that number had shot up, no, not quite saying it, more than doubled to 72%. If that doesn't sound bad, imagine your doctor saying the flesh-eating bacteria has spread from 30% of your flesh to 72% of your flesh and see how you feel. In a span of 5 years, the collective moral beliefs of the entire enterprise completely reversed. Their pliability on supposedly unchanging ethical questions was so profound it outstripped the all-Americans category. The 44% of us in 2011 who thought you could get a Hummer in the Oval Office and probably get up for work the next day expanded to 61% in 2016. Which are frankly embarrassing levels next to the evangelical. Their morality of convenience can't even tolerate the constitutionally allotted 2 terms or 8 years. They get it done in 5, apparently, if it needs doing badly enough. Friends, I've heard it said that the Bible is the big book of multiple choice. It doesn't so much give you the answer as you read it and will create whatever answer you want, or, usually for a fee, someone will make it for you. They'll smooth it over or tie this passage with that so that it sits better. And I can't help but reflect on this when I consider that I directly witnessed the political charade of 2016, when the religious right hurled themselves in droves, record-setting droves, for someone antithetical to every preachment ever uttered by their founder. And here perhaps at last is the answer. I suspect in the end their religion is the same as their morality. Convenience, and little else.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse
dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. I'm Lewayne.
I'm AJ. This is episode 3. Hi everybody, welcome to Swing State. My name is AJ, this is Lewayne, the working class skeptic, and we are so happy to have you here with us today. Thank you to anybody who's been listening to us. This is definitely a labor of love. We appreciate any kind of comments or feedback, and we have been working to resolve a couple of audio issues with the podcast, and we have another one or two to sort out in the coming weeks. Without much further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lewayne.
So here's the thing about us and religion. We've obviously made no secret of the fact neither of us are believers. We both were at one time and aren't now. But because of my association with a variety of different organizations and groups, I get messages from people on all ranges of the political spectrum. One of those includes Michael Sherrard with Faithful America. I got an email from him toward the end of the year. Everybody's trying to get those last-minute donations before the ball drops and everything starts over. But I wanted to share this message with you because basically what it amounts to is, I quote, "The coming inauguration of Donald Trump is a moment of moral and spiritual crisis for America, requiring Christians to step up in large numbers and reject the false idols of nationalism, racism, and xenophobia. Instead of fundraising, we've spent the last few weeks mobilizing Christians to show welcome to their immigrant and refugee neighbors." Again, this is normally where they would be asking me for money. Instead, their plans for the year are to, quote, "mobilize Christians and churches to act in solidarity with immigrants, refugees, Muslim Americans, and others threatened by Trump's fear-mongering and scapegoating. Challenge church leaders and institutions to break their silence and refuse to bless or cooperate with Trump's deeply un-Christian agenda. Connect grassroots activists and local church leaders with resources and opportunities to act together, building a truly national movement of resistance." These are religious people. These are evangelicals. They're liberal evangelicals who actually try and follow the message of the Christ. And they're clearly not the people who made up the 80 gazillion % of them who voted for Trump. By contrast, in roughly the same time period that I received the message from Faithful America, I also received one from Priebus, Donald J. Trump, and Ronna McDaniel. Now, Priebus's was interesting because it is titled 2017 Priorities. And I'm going to go ahead and quote it. "Yesterday, thanks to your loyal dedication to our party and the movement to make America great again," trademark, "the Electoral College officially voted to make Donald J. Trump the president-elect. 1 month from today, Mr. Trump will be sworn in as America's 45th president and will lead our party with majorities in both the House and the Senate because of the strong campaigns we were able to run with your support. While we celebrate our victories, we must remember this election was just the first step in getting America on track. The Democrats have made it clear they will adamantly oppose Mr. Trump's America First agenda and all the bullshit that includes." It then proceeds to tell me that we must secure the funds to carry the momentum forward and rebuild our party's war chest for the battles ahead. Let me repeat that. We must secure the funds to carry the momentum forward and rebuild our party's war chest for the battles ahead. The 2017 priority is to collect more money.
Go figure.
Now, to go along with that, the message from Mr. Trump, unsurprisingly, also asks me for more money. What's interesting about his way of looking at it is, to quote again, "We're paying for staff to assemble our administration in advance so that we don't waste a single second once we're sworn in on January 20th. If you want to drain the swamp with me, I need these people in there to shake up Washington. We want to hit the ground running the second we enter the White House, but we can't do it unless we put our team together far in advance. Please make a contribution," and then it proceeds to give me the dollar amounts that they would love to see me give them.
Undoubtedly high figures.
It begins with $100.
Oh, well,
yeah, exactly. Why do they need the money? Yes.
Why do they need the money? That is a literal question.
Well, his answer is, "We need to ensure we have the best and brightest from every corner of America at the start of the Trump administration. And it goes well beyond hiring the right people. We're also working on policies that we can enact on day one. But we need your help to finish our transition as strong as possible." So they need more money because they have 4,100 positions to fill. Now, those positions already exist and they're already funded because they're positions that already exist. Why do they need more money? To quote, "We're paying for staff to help assemble our administration in advance, so we don't waste a single second once we're sworn in." They're paying for staff to help assemble the administration. They literally have no idea what the fuck they're doing, and they're looking for extra money to hire people who know what they're doing to tell them who to fucking hire.
It would have been amazing how much simpler this would have been if it were, say, Hillary Clinton now about to enter the office, because she would simply have these people. She would know all of them. And I think, not to start playing the violin for the world that should be or that could have been, but we have traded Hillary Clinton, who, even if you despise this woman, you have to understand one thing about Hillary Clinton is that she is connected, to put it mildly. She could find any person in any position in the country and they would rush to come and work for her administration. We're talking about nuclear physicists, medical experts, scientific experts. Donald Trump can't find anybody to fucking perform in his inauguration. How do you think it's going to be when he's actually trying to employ people? Also, with his history of not paying people. There's also stories about his staff not being paid. As we watch this administration begin, keep your eyes wide open for this exact sort of story resurging again and again and again. This is something that I think Donald Trump is going to struggle with throughout however long his presidency lasts, because no one wants to work with or for him. Why do you think he's stuck with Kellyanne Conway and Reince Priebus and Rudy Giuliani and Chris Christie, who may end up in prison now? But hey, why is he stuck with these people? Because he's a dick, and he doesn't know anybody, and he doesn't know anything, and he doesn't want to either. So he's going to have to depend on your money to hire people that do, assuming that they can even be gotten at all. And this sort of farce is just going to continue on.
Here's the thing about that. This guy ran as an outsider, and the Republicans have had outsiders, in quotation marks, run before, like Sarah Palin and so forth, all of whom obviously not outside given the position they're in. He literally is outside the system. The problem is, because he's outside the system, he doesn't know shit about the system. He doesn't know how it works. He doesn't know what you need in order to function, and he doesn't know anybody in the system who can help him out. He's complained on Twitter, because that seems to be his primary method of communication. I think I finally figured out that's because it's only 140 characters, and that's pretty much the attention span he's got.
He's certainly no deep thinker, so Twitter is a fine venue for him.
But he's been complaining about how Obama has been kind of stonewalling him or otherwise being difficult, and I thought, well, maybe he is. I'm gonna give Trump the benefit of the doubt here. I don't know why, but let's just say for the sake of argument that Obama actually has been sort of obstructionist about helping this transition. You think maybe it's because he was kind of caught off guard by having to deal with somebody who doesn't know what the fuck they're doing? I mean, literally doesn't know what they're doing. It seemed to come as a surprise to Trump that there were going to be a bunch of positions to fill. I mean, he knew the big ones, all the big cabinet posts, but he didn't realize there were, 4,000 other jobs that needed to be filled as well.
There was a story that came out shortly after he was elected and the transition began, where his entire team, not just Donald Trump himself, his entire team was very much caught off guard by the fact that the White House staff does not remain administration to administration. His team did not know that. They didn't know it. And so when they come in, now they have to figure out, well, what are we going to do? We have to hire, 4,000 people. We have to have them be credible. We have to have them have some kind of experience, or else, obviously the entire administration will just be a rolling disaster. What this reminds me of is the line from The Big Short, where basically Mark Baum, the character in the movie, he reflects that the thing about fraud is that it doesn't actually work. It's not that fraud is bad or it's deceptive or whatever. I mean, that is a problem. But the real thing about fraud, the real reason we don't, try and set this up as an economic system or, our way of generally doing government, is because it doesn't work in the end. You don't actually have some magic bullet solution when a presidential candidate comes in not knowing the basics of the job. There's no miracle that's going to happen that's going to make Trump become suddenly an expert on this stuff overnight. There's nothing that's going to happen that's going to probably even make him become more interested in becoming an expert at all.
Here's the other thing. Because Trump is an outsider and doesn't actually know what the fuck the job entails, he was completely unprepared. Big surprise. I mean, if you threw me in, I probably wouldn't know everything I need to know, but I also don't expect to become president. If you are a political person, if you're somebody with experience with politics, if you're somebody who hasn't been a dick to everyone, it wouldn't be impossible for you to get assistance from the very people who are being replaced. In fact, if you weren't such an asshole to everybody and didn't have such a history of not paying people, it wouldn't be impossible for you to actually go to some of the people who hold those positions and say, hey, you know what? I like the work you did. I'd kind of like to keep you on. Doesn't happen a lot, but it certainly would be possible. But you'd have to know their work and how well they did it. He doesn't know anything.
The thing to take away from all this is that actions in life have consequences, and this is something that Donald Trump has avoided having to deal with his entire life. That when you live in a cocoon of wealth where no one ever tells you anything and no one tells you no, and when you work for places like NBC making a piece of shit reality show, no one's ever gonna who's gonna say anything to Donald Trump? Now he is moving into an arena where simply bullshitting people is no longer sufficient, which is a funny thing to say about politics, but it's really true. You can bullshit people when you're running for office, but when it finally comes time to do the job of being president, it's a job that I've written before. It is measured in the gray in the hair of the people who hold the office. That is the kind of job he is taking on. He is completely unprepared to do it. He is completely incapable of getting the people around him who might help him be successful at it. It almost deserves its own little extended football metaphor. If you're from the Midwest, you're an Iowa fan or something like that, you may appreciate this. I am actually a Nebraska fan. And so when we're talking about position filling, here is where the metaphor is. In the game of football at the Division I collegiate level, at a program like, I'll just take my team, Nebraska. Nebraska had a guy for about 7 years. His name was Bo Pelini. Bo Pelini had an infamous reputation as being a hothead, a person who would explode volcanically on the sideline, berate his players, yell at his staff. He would explode on them, he would yell at them, he would dress them down. And I'm talking in public. He would do this on the sideline. There was an infamous case with the quarterback at a Texas A&M game. I think it was in 2013. Bo Pelini he went ballistic on the sideline. Well, come to find out, ladies and gentlemen, this behavior actually has consequences. It means that when it comes time to, say, replace an offensive coordinator, or to get a new assistant coach, or to go out and try and land a big-time recruit, it turns out that your reputation for having this kind of behavior actually works against you. People don't want to come and work for you. People don't want to come be a part of your organization. They don't want to play for you because even from a distance they can see that you're probably not the kind of guy who's going to, let's say, have the best work culture around. Now, you can contrast this with Nebraska's new head coach, Mike Riley, who's, as of now, he's not anything, he's not Nick Saban or Jim Harbaugh, but what he is a guy who, when he fires a coach, like he recently did, and he needs to go replace him, he can get the top-flight coaches, top-flight recruiters. He can get in the homes of five-star recruits, of the best athletes. As it sits today, this isn't a sports show, but Nebraska is still in on a number of five-star prospects coming up to the signing day. And so it's just, when you have an organization with people who are competent and they're people that you want to work with, it completely changes the dynamic of your entire administration. Now, this is, of course, a metaphor going into Trump's administration. Is Trump the kind of guy you would want to work for if you're a woman, knowing his history? If you're a female who's got skill and intelligence and experience, do you want to go squander that working for a complete fraud? Or would you rather just ride it out? Because that's the calculation hundreds and hundreds, and I'm sure maybe even thousands of people are going to be making when they decide if ultimately they want to serve their country under a man like Donald Trump.
I don't know a lot about American football. For me, football, it's actually played with a white ball with these little pentagons on it.
Heretic.
Yeah, I know. That's what I grew up with as football. So, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but when you have a coach who behaves as the one you described, who's volcanic, you also realize as a coach on another team that's a weakness in the coach. And
absolutely.
You can exploit his weaknesses to win against him. You know what to expect. And somebody like that is also easily manipulated. So you can psych out this other coach because he's the one who's supposed to be directing his team, and he can't do it because he's so busy flipping out about shit. Now, imagine that if we scale this up to what we're dealing with in reality, imagine that the other coach is running a fucking country like, I don't know, Russia, and you know that the buffoon running the other team doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. He's easily manipulated. His ego is easily stroked. He's as easily manipulated as a child. That's what we're talking about. But The consequences, to go back to that word, are a bit more dire than who wins or loses a fucking championship. You're talking about nuclear powers who look at the guy running our team and thinking, this guy's a fucking idiot.
If you're Vladimir Putin, you've got to be dancing up and down the halls of the Kremlin. You could not have asked for a better set of characteristics to work with or against in this case, because it's a man who you can bait, who you can puff up and flatter. You can easily manipulate him. You can make him think anything you want because he lives in his own little reality, and all you have to do is feed into that. And ladies and gentlemen, we have now a president-elect who is tweeting against North Korea, a nuclear power.
Also run by a child. So, yeah, think about that. Imagine two fucking hotheads with nuclear powers sniping at each other on fucking Twitter, only scaled up.
The thing that really keeps me up at night is not that I have some specific prediction of, when the apocalypse will begin. It's simply that there are so many things that can go wrong and so few that can go right, that just as a basic level of calculation, that we seem to be entering a very dire period in our history because we are completely unequipped now to deal with the threats that we face. If you ask Europe or South America or Asia, America has more or less abdicated its leadership in the world. According to the German weekly Der Spiegel, they published an article that said exactly that they believe that America has abdicated its responsibility as leader of the free world. And, well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to me and you weren't alive, let's say, during like World War I, we have never experienced a period like this. We are definitely entering uncharted territory, and we are doing so with our captain, our coach, our man at the helm, is completely unable to deal with any of this at all.
Aside from being temperamentally unsuited, again, I hate to beat this drum over and over, he doesn't fucking know anything. He doesn't know anything about his position. And he's going to go up against people who do. And again, I don't want to keep coming back to Putin, but it's kind of hard to avoid it because, first of all, if there's any one thing I can say about Putin, he's fucking smart. And he's fucking dangerous. Jesus Christ, when he first came to power, the first thing I heard was he used to be in the KGB. This is a crafty son of a bitch, okay? There's no other way around it. This guy survived through everything that happened throughout the Soviet Union while in the KGB and now runs the goddamn country. The bigger issue is not just that his competition is fucking Biff Tannen, but that Putin's allies are in the fucking cabinet. These are people who've dealt with Russia, who've profited from dealing with Russia. And
who get medals from Putin himself in the case of Rex Tillerson. The highest medal that Russia can offer a foreigner was bestowed on Rex Tillerson, who is now going to head the State Department, assuming Trump gets his way.
Which I can't imagine why he wouldn't, since he owns all the fucking marbles. That's the other problem. It's not just enough that Trump himself is a fucking walking disaster, but he also, his party at least, controls everything.
And just to stick with Putin for a second, because I've been trying to do my research on this particular figure. Guys, you have to understand that Vladimir Putin is a lifetime political animal, if nothing else. He now runs a pseudo-democracy in Russia. It's basically a dictatorship. He is an authoritarian figure. It's a gangster mafia state where everybody pays protection. It's called having a roof over your head. It's very similar if you were to go to Italian neighborhoods and say like the 1920s and 30s, you pay protection, you pay, be ashamed if something happened to you. It's exactly that, only at the state level. Vladimir Putin has perhaps made himself the richest person on earth by running a racket out of his own country where everybody pays and he skims off everything. He has done this his whole life. This is all he does. This is who he is. He manipulates and connives and plots to increase his own power at the expense of the United States. And now we have our president-elect tweeting how brilliant he is. What a smart guy he is. What a great leader. He isn't. He is not. He is the most anti-American, anti-freedom, anti-liberty person, one of the worst in the world on these subjects. Jailing political dissidents, murder, theft, you name it. The guy is a monster. And our president, soon-to-be president, thinks that this is all great.
Our soon-to-be president admires those attributes about Putin, because he's manly and tough He says what he feels like, and he does what he wants. And that's the type of shit that Trump really goes for.
And what he would love nothing less than to be able to run the country like Putin runs Russia. But guess what, Chachki? You're in for a rude awakening in the United States of America.
So for those of you who might be Trump voters or Trump supporters, maybe this even sounds good to you, because maybe you think Obama's been a pussy about everything, and now you have somebody really manly in charge. But you need to consider what happens when it's your turn in the barrel. What happens when it's you, I guess, is ultimately what I'm getting at. And here's the problem. I realize that empathy is a problem in America. And I can't really lie. It's particularly difficult, apparently, for a lot of the Republican Party to deal with. But you have to think about what happens when it's me. What happens when it's my turn? It's great when you think it's just going to be the fags or the people with brown skin or the illegals or the lazy people or the old people or whoever it is that you think doesn't deserve whatever it is they get. That's great. But what happens when it's your turn?
And this is something that I believe it was David Chase who wrote The Sopranos. He often talked about is people like Trump, incidentally. They admire the mafia. They think, oh, wow, it's so cool. It's a secret society where you prick your finger and you can you burn a portrait and suddenly you're in this special club where you can do whatever you want to civilians. Well, that's all fine and good until it's you having some asshole walk into your store and suddenly you've got a new best friend who won't go away, who the FBI can't help you with because they're not technically doing anything illegal. They're intimidating you. They're harassing you in your business. They're threatening you. These are the kind of people that Trump admires. These are the kind of, I think this is the kind of person he aspires to be. And he is enabling those types of actors in the world on a scale that was just incomprehensible under any former president, Republican or Democrat. This is insanity, his position on Russia and on Vladimir Putin. We have to stop it before it even gets started.
There's been an ongoing debate among pretty much everybody who isn't a supporter of Trump, whether or not things would be better if Trump were not in office, like if he is impeached and Mike Pence were to take office. And I know that there are a lot of people on the side of opposing Mike Pence who would argue that having him in office is even worse because he is a political creature and he is, frankly, a bigot. And there's whole classes of people that he absolutely despises and would do everything in his power to step on. And I know it's easy for me, as someone who's really not part of any of those classes of people, to seem as if I'm just waving those concerns aside. But Pence is religious, and he's a politician. To some degree, that makes him, if not predictable, then understandable. There's a pattern of behavior to work with. At the very least, it makes him more predictable than Trump, who seems like he could start a fucking nuclear war because of a tweet. If Pence is in office, then we can focus on stonewalling his attempts to turn half the U.S. population into second-class or even non-citizens. With Trump in power, we have to watch everything that's fucking going on. And we have no idea which way we need to go or where we need to focus. If Pence is in charge, we know where we need to focus, which is stopping him from doing all the shit that he plans on doing. Trump, we have no idea he doesn't know what the fuck he's planning on doing. Probably partly because people are telling him what he's supposed to be doing because he doesn't fucking know.
We need to be clear about one thing. As of right now today, Donald Trump, he is not responsible for anything yet. He has been elected, but he has not assumed office. So he can walk around and tweet and say whatever he wants. As the weight of the office slowly begins to close in on him, hopefully he has some understanding of his responsibilities, although I seriously doubt he's capable of that. When he finally does assume office, for real, he is going to be looking at his popularity numbers every single day, and I have a fair feeling that is going to be how he determines what policies to pick up and put down and who to betray and who to help out.
No, I think you're right. I think that when he's actually in office and actually has to pay attention to what's going on, or at least sort of pretend he is going to be paying attention to the popularity polls, because ultimately that's what he wants. He wants somebody to stroke his ego, and he wants to know he's doing the right thing. It's also one of the things that make me say he's sort of childish about things, because he wants to just do whatever he wants, like a kid, but he also craves attention and he craves positive feedback. I think if there's any way that we're going to be able to really stand up against him, it's going to be in doing that. It's going to be in the feedback. The problem is right now, he thinks it's funny when he gets the negative feedback. When people tweet him, which I guess is one of the good things about him actually being on Twitter all the fucking time, is I can literally tweet him and tell him what a dumbass he's being. The problem is right now he thinks it's funny. He thinks it's a joke when people tell him that, because it's just people. And he actually doesn't give a shit about half of us because we told him to go fuck himself.
We're the enemies. Remember that tweet? The enemies, his enemies, the American citizens, his enemies that voted against him or tried to stop him from coming to power.
Yeah, let's look at that. Let's look at the word enemies, okay? He's talking about over half of voting population. And I would probably wager more than half of the American population. He's calling Americans enemies. Who has enemies like that? Fucking authoritarian dictators.
Authoritarians tend to find enemies anywhere that they can find them because they're sort of necessary to prop up a continuing need for their power. I mean, Donald Trump sort of sees his presidency as a necessary check on the evils of the other party, the other people, the ones that try to oppose him.
That's what he ran on. His campaign was primarily, look what a big dick I have, and look at what a cunt she is. Only now he doesn't have the cunt to bitch about. He can't put anything off on her. He can't complain about how she's doing anything. It's all on him now, but he's already starting to make sure he has enemies again.
You will substitute one enemy for a new enemy. And this is something that I was recently reading, The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt, who was a Jewish philosopher who was writing about and critiquing both the rise of Nazism and then its aftermath and also Stalinism. And one of the things that she goes into great detail about later on in the book is the difference between a totalitarian movement and totalitarians once they're in power. Now, Donald Trump, as of today, he is not a totalitarian. He does not have a world ambition to control, or at least not a naked ambition to control the world, dominate the world in every sphere of public and private life. He does not have that. He is an authoritarian. He is a right-wing fascist, but he is not yet a totalitarian. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn a few lessons, hopefully not treading too close to Godwin's law on the subject. So I'll just read you a brief segment from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, to give you a sample of what it's like to see our own history mirrored in another dark time. So here you have it. Practically speaking, the paradox of totalitarianism in power is that the possession of all instruments of governmental power and violence in one country is not an unmixed blessing for a totalitarian movement. Its disregard for facts, its strict adherence to the rules of a fictitious world, becomes steadily more difficult to maintain, yet remains as essential as it was before. Power means a direct confrontation with reality, and totalitarianism in power is constantly concerned with overcoming this challenge. Propaganda and organization no longer suffice to assert that the impossible is possible, that the incredible is true, and that the insane consistency rules the world. The chief psychological support of totalitarian fiction, the active resentment of the status quo, which the masses refuse to accept as the only possible world, is no longer there. Every bit of factual information that leaks through the Iron Curtain, set up against the ever-threatening flood of reality from the other, non-totalitarian side, is a greater menace to totalitarian domination than counter-propaganda has been to totalitarian movements. The interesting little nugget in there, just that one passage, and the whole book is worth reading for a whole host of reasons, not just because it pertains to our time, but it does seem to pertain to our time increasingly by the day. But the important part of there is that Donald Trump, his entire campaign was based upon a constant negation of reality. He would deny facts. He would deny his own statements. His entire version of the world where America is a rolling disaster, our economy is plunging, our military is a mess, useless, and no one's scared of us anymore. All of it was nonsense. But his commitment to unreality is maintained whether or not he's running for office or has office. The difference being, once he is in office and he no longer has Hillary Clinton to blame for all of his ills and some conspiracy of media and Democrats to explain why his policies are coming to ruin, he will have to seek out others to blame for that.
Guess who that's going to be? That's going to be us. That's going to be you. That's going to be anybody who says the wrong thing to him. Again, one of the nice things about him being a Twitter maniac is that we can tell him what an asshole he is. The downside, of course, to that is with that freedom comes the risk that he's going to start paying attention. Some of his inner circle will start paying attention. And they'll need to focus on who the new enemy is because they don't have Clinton to blame. And they don't have the Democrats to blame, really, because they have every branch of the government. So there's literally nobody stonewalling them. There is no loyal opposition. There is no protection for the American people.
Don't think for 1 second that the plain ridiculousness of his assertions coming forward, that it's Democrats or liberals or whoever that's causing the stumbling blocks for his proposals and propositions when he's governing, he will never be tethered to reality. In that sense, he will always be able to claim to his followers that it's some other powerful, nefarious force, even if that force doesn't exist or isn't powerful. That's another echo that you see from the origins of totalitarianism when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it was rising in Nazi Germany, is that the Jews actually did not have all the power and money, but Hitler said it anyway because it worked.
That's the thing. It works now. Trump lied through most of his campaign about everything, about the state of America, about the state of his opposition, about his accomplishments, about his failures. He lied about all of it, and it didn't matter. They believe it. They continue to believe it. And that's part of the problem that we have in opposing Trump is we are hamstrung by reality. He and his followers are not.
It's very reminiscent of another quote that just sort of sends chills up my spine when I read it from Hannah Arendt's book. A mixture of gullibility and cynicism has been an outstanding characteristic of mob mentality before it became an everyday phenomenon of masses. In an ever-changing, incomprehensible world, the masses had reached the point where they would, at the same time, believe everything and nothing, think that everything was possible and that nothing was true. The mixture in itself was remarkable enough because it spelled the end of the illusion that gullibility was a weakness of unsuspecting primitive souls, and cynicism the vice of superior and refined minds. Mass propaganda discovered that its audience was ready at all times to believe the worst, no matter how absurd, and did not particularly object to being deceived because it held every statement to be a lie anyhow. The totalitarian mass leaders based their propaganda on the correct psychological assumption that, under such conditions, one could make people believe the most fantastic statements one day, and trust that if the next day they were given irrefutable proof of their falsehood, they would take refuge in cynicism. Instead of deserting the leaders who lied to them, they would protest that they had known all along that the statement was a lie, and would admire the leaders for their superior tactical cleverness.
Wow, that doesn't sound remotely familiar at all. When was that written?
This was written in 1951. How little has changed in the intervening years.
The difference, though, is that by the time we've gotten to where we are with Trump, nobody even seems to give a shit. Prior to that, you had to at least pretend that you knew what you were doing. The dictators, particularly of World War II, at least had to look like they knew what they were doing. They would dress up in their military outfits, and they would do their parades, and they would do all that stuff. Trump hasn't even had to do that. He really just gets up there, turns on the mic, and just says whatever the fuck he feels like, which we get to do too. The difference is we're not the ones that are tasked with running the fucking nation.
Well, and his followers have throughout the campaign, they displayed a kind of nihilism and cynicism towards facts of all kinds. I mean, forgetting even the fake news stories that have been emerging, since the election. The thing that echoes in history is a people's willingness to believe nonsense, and then if it's refuted, they just don't care. And that's the one thing that I guess amazes me the most about Donald Trump is that I have previously labeled him a con man, and I believe that he is. I have never in my life seen a con man who will readily drop all pretense of what he is. He will admit to essentially being what he is and boast about dodging taxes, ripping off workers, and people nevertheless follow him and laud him. As Hannah Arendt puts it, they will admire their leaders for their superior tactical cleverness.
Or as he put it, I'm smart for not paying taxes.
And I alone can fix the problems in Washington. Please remember that part.
Well, all of it. That make America great again. I jokingly put trademark after it whenever I write that because it's become a campaign slogan. That's one of his lies right there. It's the one that people repeat the most. America was already doing pretty well. America was pretty great. There's still a lot of problems. There's still a lot of cops shooting black guys for no particular reason. And there's certainly no shortage of income inequality. And there's certainly plenty of religious intrusion into politics. But the nation as a whole was actually doing pretty well. Individuals, maybe not so much, particularly in the industrial Midwest and some of the areas that did go for Trump. Maybe on an individual case-by-case basis, America maybe wasn't great for them. And frankly, it's not going to get any better for those same people.
There is a lot in there because, to start with, Republicans are the ultimate goalpost-moving party. If Mitt Romney had brought the unemployment rate down to 4.1% and the Dow Jones Industrial Average to 20,000, he would be probably in line for Mount Rushmore. If Mitt Romney had accomplished half of what Obama had, he would be the new Ronaldus Magnus. He would be the great Republican leader. But because they moved the goalposts, none of that simply counts. We will pivot to Donald Trump's version of reality, where America is just a rolling disaster and nothing's going well, even though there is a serious problem in the Midwest with good-paying jobs. There is terrible wealth and income inequality. As a gentleman I was speaking with the other day, just talking about politics, he said it seems like you either make a ton of money or you make nothing. There doesn't seem to be a lot in between anymore.
Here's the thing. Why is it that you either make a bundle or you don't make anything? Whose policies are driving that? I don't know. Could it be the guys in charge? America, sort of, just elected a businessman who's gotten by and gotten wealthy by screwing people, by screwing the people he works with, by screwing the people who work for him. That's the guy you voted for who was going to change everything, except that that's the guy who's made his living using those very policies against you.
And lying about it. And lying and lying and lying. Donald Trump lies so frequently that I'm not even sure if he's capable of telling the truth at times. It's like we talked about. He does it pathologically. He does it when he doesn't need to. He does it when he needs to. And as it happens, he actually does need to lie quite a bit. Because if he simply had to stand on his record and be judged by his business success, he would have never made it anywhere in politics, let alone to the highest office in the land with no political experience whatsoever. But the entire thing is a charade, and the thing that we need to keep in mind and keep a close, vigilant watch on is this tap dance routine is not going to change, because it can't change. It's essential to Donald Trump's entire image.
I was going to say all frauds are exposed and revealed for what they are. But Trump's already done that. He's already revealed the fraud, and nobody cares. Nobody cares because he speaks with authority. He speaks as if he knows the truth.
He gives people the impression that he knows some secret thing. He's done this multiple times, whether he has the secret plan to deal with ISIS because he knows more than the generals, or he knows what's going to happen with North Korea, or he's going to reveal more personally on the Russian hacking scandal because he just has some in-depth knowledge. This is a part of his game. This is how a confidence man gains your trust, is he puffs himself up and tries to make himself appear as though he has some secret hidden wisdom, when in fact he has nothing of the kind. He's just telling you that because he knows that there's a better than even shot that around half the people he talks to will suspect on some level that he's right, and at the very least not bother to look into it, so he will have successfully duped them in that way. And as for the other ones, well, they're the enemies. The enemies of his truth. That's the thing. Donald Trump has enemies. They're the enemies of his truth, his version of reality. That is who he will target, and that's who we're going to have to watch out and watch their backs as soon as he takes office.
He, or his representatives at least, have already begun shaking down the Department of Energy, looking for those involved with climate change research. That sounds like somebody who's looking for a way to manipulate reality, to root out and eliminate the people who could oppose them with facts.
And this is typical of Republicans and how they operate. If you look in Florida, they did a very similar thing where they tried to banish even the mention of climate change or global warming from any state documents, websites. This is the aspect of the totalitarian that we're hitting on here, is that there's little seeds of the totalitarian in this, because you have people who, because they can't confront reality on a factual basis, they're going to have to instead manipulate it to make plain facts look as something they are not. And they will go to basically whatever lengths they have to ensure that their narrative is not disrupted within their own department. And if that means you have to weed out every climate scientist in the energy department, well, so be it, because that helps our movement, which is the important thing. Remember, we have to stop the enemies. The enemies, the American people who are the enemies.
That's where the biggest problem lies. One could make an argument for the primary difference between the Republican and Democratic parties. The Republicans appear to operate under the one guiding principle. What we do or what our party wants is what has to happen. It doesn't matter beyond that. The Democratic Party obviously wants whatever stuff they want done to happen too. But here's the difference. Generally speaking, what the Democrats want is not to intentionally cause harm to whole groups of people. It may be a byproduct once in a while. It happens. But it's not the goal.
Let's also just stop for a moment and reflect on the fact that the Democratic Party, unlike the Republican Party, is a coalition party. The Democratic Party represents interests from labor to minority groups to the LGBTQ community. They have active members and advocates within their organization. The Republicans, they really only have a couple of key voting blocks, or actually one key voting block being the religious right, and then they have the financial interests of the corporations of the country, and particularly like the fossil fuel companies, who donate millions and millions and millions of dollars to candidates up and down the ballot to make sure that their interests are forwarded through the apparatus of the Republican Party. And if that acts, as in the case of climate change, directly against the interests of the United States and the people that live there, no, that doesn't matter, because they're the enemy, right? They're the enemies of freedom or liberty or whatever other ridiculous, nonsensical slogan you're trying to convince yourself is the reason for why we have to burn more fossil fuels in the day and age, knowing what we know about the science.
Because, as I think we addressed last time too, the worst thing that happens if we act as if climate change is real and we make changes in the way we do things based on that, the worst thing that happens is things improve. The worst thing that happens is we have less reliance on fossil fuels. We're doing less to dump cancer-causing material into our air, into our water.
That cuts into profits. which is a big problem for the Republican Party because in their mind, making money, that's like the foundational liberty. You can make money doing anything in the Republican Party.
If you have any doubt that the profit is more important than people, just look at who you voted for. Look at who's going to be the president of the United States. This is a guy who has zero political experience. He's a terrible fucking businessman, but he talks a good game and he has a lot of money, probably, because we still haven't seen the tax returns. Who knows? That's not going to happen. That's the guy that a significant enough number of the population voted for. This is a guy who's in office because he talks a big talk and he walks a big walk, and people think he has money. And somehow they still think that means something about a person's character. The amount of money is somehow reflective of that person's abilities and their morality. And that only happens if you're not paying attention. That only happens if you're blinded by the reality he's shaping.
And that's why, going to tie this back to religion, this song and dance is as old as the country. The connection between wealth and moral value has seemingly passed unquestioned by a vast majority of religious voters. Religious voters, the ones who I thought would have seen through this perhaps the easiest of any American because they're not necessarily tethered to the capitalistic cult.
The ones with a specific quote in their holy book about camels, eyes and needles, and rich guys.
And plenty of other stuff in there too if that one doesn't do it for you, because it's what they've always done.
And because, God forbid, they attach themselves to a candidate who represents the party of those queers, or those poor people, or whatever outgroup you don't like. But the problem is, all of those people are in fact people. And the guy running the show doesn't represent them.
Has no interest in representing them. Has no intention of representing them. Or his followers, for that matter. Donald Trump does not represent the working class whites either. He was caught on tape shortly after he was elected going through a restaurant, I think it was in New York City, and he was telling people, oh, don't worry, we're going to get your taxes down. This time I actually believe him because that is the core philosophy of the Republican Ayn Rand Party, the Banana Republicans. The only thing they care about is cutting corporate taxes and their own taxes for the wealthy. And that is something they will almost assuredly do to the detriment of the people who put Trump in office. And he will then lie, deny, evade, whatever he has to do to try and push the fiction, he will do, because he can't stop now that he's this deep into it.
On that happy note, we probably ought to wrap things up for the day. Thank you again, as always, for listening. Make sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check out our website. Links will be in the show notes. We'll also include a link to Hannah Arendt's book.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, organize, mobilize, protest, vote.